You ever get that feeling like you're just trying to figure things out in a world where maybe the rules aren't so clear, or maybe they just keep changing? That sort of feeling, that uncertainty, it really got me interested in digging into some, pretty deep philosophical stuff, existentialism and absurdism.
Yeah.
So we're going to try and explore what these are really about and maybe figure out why they seem to crop up in some pretty unexpected places today.
Exactly. These are philosophies that really get to the heart of, what it means to be human, right? Especially when you're trying to find your place, your purpose in a universe that doesn't exactly hand you the answers on a plate.
Right.
And to help us unpack all this, we've got some really interesting sources lined up.
We do. First up, there's this really detailed analysis from the International Research Journal of Education and Technology. It kind of lays the groundwork, looking at existentialism and absurdism through Sartre and Camus, big names there.
The big ones, yeah.
Then, to see how these ideas actually show up in culture, we've got two different takes on Rick and Morty.
Yeah, yes, the cartoon.
Yeah, one's from Telegraph India, focusing specifically on the absurdism in the show, and another from MovieWeb that looks at its whole philosophical vibe, existentialism, nihilism, and absurdism.
Quite a mix.
And finally, there's an academic paper from Core. It explores why this specific kind of absurdist humor in Rick and Morty seems to hit home so much with millennials.
Interesting angle.
So the mission today really is to get a handle on the core ideas of these philosophies, see where they overlap, where they differ, and understand why a show like Rick and Morty, which might seem just like a crazy cartoon on the surface, could actually be tapping into some pretty profound stuff.
Sounds good. So where do we start? Historically, where did these big ideas even spring from?
Good question. What was the spark?
Well, that International Research Journal article points to a really key context, the 19th century, but especially the massive upheaval and, frankly, the despair caused by the two world wars.
Ah, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, the sheer scale of suffering, the way societies seemed to break down, it forced people to question everything, including those traditional sources of meaning, like religion.
Right, if the old answers don't work anymore.
Exactly. The article mentions Nietzsche's famous line, "God is dead." It really captured that feeling, that loss of a universal sort of prepackaged meaning for everything.
Okay, so if those old frameworks start crumbling, you're left asking, well, what now? If there's no big plan, then what? So let's start with existentialism. What's its answer to navigating that void?
Okay, existentialism.
Yeah.
At its core, as the journal explains it, it puts this huge emphasis on the individual, on your existence right now, and the kind of radical freedom that comes with that.
Radical freedom. Sounds good, but maybe a little scary.
Well, yeah, because it's not just do whatever you want freedom. It comes with this immense weight of responsibility for what you do choose. A real cornerstone idea is existence precedes essence.
Okay, break that down. Existence precedes essence.
Think about a hammer. Someone designs it for a purpose, hitting nails, right? Its essence, its purpose comes before it even exists.
Got it.
Existentialism says for humans, it's the other way around. We're born, we exist first, without some built-in purpose or fixed nature.
We just show up.
We just show up. And then, through our choices, through how we live, we define our own essence. We create our own meaning.
So no instruction manual included at birth. We're writing it ourselves as we go.
Right.
Wow, that sounds, incredibly empowering on one hand.
Totally.
But also, maybe a recipe for some serious anxiety.
Oh, absolutely. That tension is right there at the center of it. Because if you are truly free to define yourself, then you're also completely, totally responsible for that definition, for the choices you make. There's no cosmic referee, no pre-written moral code to fall back on and say, well, I had to do that.
Right. No excuses.
No excuses.
Yeah.
The journal mentions this phrase, human is condemned to be free. It sounds harsh, but it gets at that inescapable burden. You can't not choose. Even choosing not to choose is a choice.
Condemned to be free. Heavy. So what happens if you try to duck that responsibility? Just go with the flow, do what everyone else does?
Yeah, what if you just try to blend in or pretend you don't really have a choice? That's where this concept of bad faith comes in. The journal defines it pretty much exactly like that. Avoiding your freedom, avoiding responsibility by letting other things dictate your life.
Like society's expectations. Or just following orders.
Exactly. Letting others decide without really thinking critically about it yourself. It's a kind of self-deception, really.
Okay. Bad faith. Got it.
Then you've got this other distinction they make between being for itself, that's like our consciousness, our subjective inner world.
Our experience.
Right. Versus being in itself, which is more like the objective world, things that just, like a rock or a table, they don't choose what they are. And existentialists, they reject that idea of a fixed human nature. And like we said, they generally reject the idea of a God dictating things. They even push back against the idea of objective truth, suggesting truth is more, well, subjective, a product of your choices, your commitments.
Whoa, okay. That sounds potentially tricky. If truth is just whatever I decide, doesn't that get chaotic?
Yeah, that's the common critique, isn't it? It definitely leans into a very, very individual perspective. The journal also lists some things existentialists were against.
Like what?
Like judging your life just by external stuff, wealth, status, or just blindly following social norms, or passively accepting your fate.
Just letting things happen to you.
Right. And also this sort of uncritical faith that science and progress automatically make life better. They question that too.
Interesting.
And the journal brings up Sartre's idea that the really fundamental choice, the one that gives your life direction, actually comes from looking back, reflecting on your past actions.
Not just looking forward.
Yeah. And the term existentialism itself, apparently, we can thank Soren Kierkegaard. He used it way back, kind of as a reaction against purely abstract philosophy. He wanted to bring it back to the real lived experience of the individual.
Okay, so the big themes are individuality, radical freedom, creating your own meaning through action, all in a world that doesn't give you one up front.
That sums it up pretty well.
Now, Jean-Paul Sartre, his name keeps coming up. Why was he such a central figure? What was his specific contribution?
Well, Sartre, as the journal lays out, was just massively influential, not just as a philosopher, but he was also a successful writer, novels, plays.
Right, nausea.
Exactly. And his big contribution was really fleshing out this whole existentialist framework, focusing on that human freedom, the responsibility that comes with it, and arguing for a kind of inherent human dignity, even in a godless universe.
And he wasn't just writing academic papers?
No, not at all. He famously didn't care much for, like, the purely aesthetic side of his writing. For him, the philosophy, the ideas were the main thing.
The message over the medium, maybe.
Sort of, yeah. His own life seems interesting, too. Lost his father early, kind of an unusual upbringing. Maybe that fed into his independent thinking.
Yeah.
He was brilliant academically, obviously.
And he hung out with other major thinkers?
Oh, yeah. Simone de Beauvoir, of course. An incredible intellectual partnership. He also really engaged with German philosophers like Heidegger and Husserl.
Yeah.
That really cemented his atheism.
And Nausea, the novel, really captures that feeling.
It does. It vividly portrays that sense of, well, nausea. Of feeling alienated, finding the world meaningless, absurd. And Sartre wasn't just an armchair philosopher either. He was very politically active.
Right, the French resistance during the war.
Yeah, he believed in acting on your beliefs, engaging with the world. That was crucial for him.
Okay, so Nausea gives you the feeling. What about his plays? The journal mentioned No Exit. How do these big ideas show up there?
No Exit.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic, really intense play, perfect little pressure cooker for existential themes. You probably know the famous line.
Hell is other people.
That's the one. And it definitely captures a key part of it, how our relationships, how we perceive others perceiving us, can be a source of real torment. But it's deeper than just that.
How so?
Well, think about existence precedes essence. The characters are just there, in this room, which is hell. No pre-assigned roles. They're just confronting who they are based on their past lives, their choices, and condemned to be free. They can't leave. They're stuck with each other, stuck with the consequences of their actions. There's no escape from their choices or the dynamic between them.
In bad faith. Are they avoiding responsibility?
Oh, constantly. They're trying to justify themselves, blame each other, deny what they did. Classic bad faith.
Right.
You also see the being for itself versus being in itself, their intense self-awareness, their subjectivity, bumping up against the inescapable reality of that room, their situation.
And no God coming to sort it out.
Exactly. No divine judgment, no external moral code in the play itself. It's all them. They create their own hell, essentially, through their inability to honestly confront themselves and each other.
Wow. Okay, so that's a pretty intense picture of existentialism in action. Hell is other people, or maybe hell is being trapped with the consequences of your own bad faith choices around other people.
Definitely like that, yeah.
Now let's switch gears a bit to absurdism. The journal said it shares that starting point, the meaningless universe idea, but takes a slightly different angle. What's the key difference there?
Right. So both start from that sense of a universe without inherent meaning, but where existentialism, like Sartre's version anyway, emphasizes our ability, our need to create meaning. Absurdism, as the journal highlights, really focuses on the clash, the conflict, the tension between our deep-seated human craving for meaning, for purpose, for rational order.
Yeah, we really want things to make sense.
We desperately do. And absurdism says that desire crashes headlong into a universe that is just silent, indifferent, irrational even.
So the absurd isn't just a feeling of weirdness, it's that fundamental mismatch.
Exactly. It's the confrontation between us, the meaning seekers, and the universe, the meaning void. That collision is the absurd. It's not just a personal problem, it's like the basic condition of being human in this cosmos.
So it's not just that I can't find the meaning, it's that meaning, the kind I'm looking for, maybe isn't even out there to be found. It's a human thing the universe doesn't share.
That's the core idea, yeah. And the big name here is Albert Camus.
Right, Camus.
The journal mentions his own life, born in Algeria, father died in World War I, his own battles with tuberculosis. These experiences seem to really shape his view that life is, well, fundamentally absurd.
And he didn't like being called an existentialist.
Apparently not. He preferred absurdist, and his work consistently circles around these themes. The absurd, alienation, suicide as a response to meaninglessness, and also the idea of revolt against the absurd.
Revolt? How do you revolt against the universe being silent?
We'll get to that. Interestingly, Sartre apparently saw Camus more as a writer of, like, philosophical tales, not straight-up novels. But Camus saw himself as a writer, someone who critiques myths, calls out falsehoods, advocates for reason, compassion, freedom. His life itself, his public stances, kind of embodied his philosophy. He lived it.
And his writing style was distinctive.
Yeah, the journal notes this blend. It's got a kind of romantic feel sometimes, but with that clear, precise French philosophical tradition underpinning it.
Okay, so Camus zeroes in on this absurdity, this disconnect between our need for meaning and the universe just shrugging. What did he think we should do about it? How are we supposed to respond to that unreasonable silence?
According to the journal, Camus saw that confrontation, our yearning for happiness and reason versus the world's silence as the defining feature. And facing that, he, and Nietzsche too apparently, saw three main paths opening up.
Okay, what are they?
1, suicide, just checking out from a meaningless existence.
Great.
2, what he called a leap of faith, jumping into religion or some other belief system that imposes meaning from the outside.
Like pretending the silence isn't there.
Kind of, yeah. Or finding an answer that isn't based on rational observation of the world. And 3, facing the absurdity head on, accepting it.
And Camus leaned towards number 3.
Absolutely. He strongly rejected suicide, saw it as giving in to the absurd, letting it win, and he rejected the leap of faith too, saw it as intellectually dishonest, like dodging the truth of our situation.
So what's left?
Embrace the present. Embrace the physical reality around you. That's the only thing we can be truly certain of. His key principles, as the journal lists them, include denying God and any pre-made meaning, accepting that sense of isolation, recognizing our freedom within that absurdity, acknowledging suffering as part of it all, and seeing the individual as the center of their own experience.
Okay, so the answer isn't trying to escape the meaninglessness, but living in it, authentically.
It's the idea. Confront it, acknowledge it, and then live passionately despite it. And he explored this powerfully in his novel, The Stranger.
Meursault.
Right. The journal points out how Meursault's reaction to his mother's death, or rather, his lack of the expected reaction, is just baffling to society.
He doesn't cry at the funeral, drinks coffee.
Exactly. And it shows the absurdity of society demanding certain performances of grief. Then later in court, they're more focused on his lack of tears at the funeral than the actual murder he committed.
Which highlights how society tries to force meaning and judgment onto everything.
Precisely. And Meursault ultimately rejects God, rejects the afterlife. He finds it all frivolous and non-essential when facing death. What matters to him is the now, the physical sensations.
The sun on the beach.
The sun, the sea, yeah. He's described as someone who refuses to play the game, refuses the usual societal pretenses. He wants that raw, unvarnished truth, even if it's uncomfortable, like being in love with a sun that leaves no shadows, no room for comforting illusions.
Oh, wow. Meursault sounds... Well, he might find some common ground with the characters in Rick and Morty, maybe.
Huh, maybe so.
So we've got existentialism, create your own meaning, absurdism, accept the lack of inherent meaning and the tension that creates. How do they properly stack up against each other? What's the core difference again?
Okay, yeah. The journal makes this distinction pretty clear. Both start with universe inherently meaningless. Agreed on that.
Right. Starting point shared.
But existentialism then says, okay, Because of that, it's on us humans to create meaning. Through choices, actions. That's the existence precedes essence bit.
Our job to fill the void.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Absurdism, though, stays focused on the tension itself, the permanent conflict between our deep desire for meaning and significance and a world that just doesn't provide it. That conflict is the absurd condition.
So maybe a simple way to think about it is existentialism says no meaning. Okay, let's make some. And absurdism is more like no meaning and we desperately want it. Wow, this whole situation is fundamentally ridiculous.
That's actually, yeah, that's a really good, concise way to put it. The journal notes that absurdists see us stuck in that ridiculous tension. And the responses are those three options again. Suicide, rejecting it, the leap of faith, trying to ignore or escape it, or acceptance, living fully despite it.
And Camus's image for that acceptance.
Sisyphus, the guy condemned by the gods to push a huge boulder up a hill only for it to roll back down every single time, forever.
Sounds awful.
It is on the surface. But Camus famously concludes, one must imagine Sisyphus happy.
Happy, pushing a rock forever.
Happy in the sense of accepting his fate, finding meaning or maybe defiance, a kind of freedom in the struggle itself, even though the task is ultimately meaningless. He embraces the absurdity of his existence.
Okay, I think I get that. Finding value in the effort, not the outcome.
Exactly. So while existentialism is often about that individual quest for meaning in a tough, alienating world, absurdism really hammers home what Camus called the divorce between the mind that desires and the world that disappoints.
Or as another philosopher, Thomas Nagel, put it.
Right, the journal mentions Nagel describing it as the collision between the seriousness with which we take our lives and the perpetual possibility of regarding everything as arbitrary.
That hits home. The feeling that maybe none of this matters as much as we think it does.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into Rick and Morty.
Right. The cultural phenomenon. How does this cartoon, of all things, plug into these really heavy philosophical ideas?
Well, the Telegraph India article nails it, saying the show just dives headfirst into absurdism. It constantly pokes at questions of meaning, purpose, usually through some really dark, really out-there humor.
Like the butter-passing robot.
Oh, the butter robot. Perfect example. Its only purpose is to pass butter. It has this existential crisis asking, what is my purpose? And Rick just deadpans, you pass butter? Then adds, welcome to the club, pal.
Oof. Yeah, that's bleak, but funny.
Exactly. It's absurd. Funny, unsettling, philosophical all at once. That's the show's sweet spot.
So it's not just like crazy sci-fi adventures and burp jokes. There's actual substance under there.
Oh, absolutely. The Movie Web article really stresses this. Beneath all the chaos and, the crudeness, it's constantly playing with these big worldview ideas. Nihilism, hedonism, and definitely absurdism. The Telegraph piece brings up that episode where Summer, Rick's granddaughter, finds out she was kind of an accident. Her existence didn't really change much in the grand scheme.
Yeah.
And Morty tries to comfort her, but his comfort is basically nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's going to die. Come watch TV.
Wow. That's some comfort.
It is, but it's also brutally honest within the show's worldview, and he follows it up by talking about how he buried his own corpse from another dimension after they messed up their original reality.
Jeez. Okay, yeah, that's pretty heavy for animation.
It really is. And that darkness, that willingness to go there, is a big reason it connects, especially with certain audiences. The core academic paper argues this point really strongly.
What's the argument?
That Rick and Morty's specific flavor of absurdist humor isn't just random. It resonates deeply with millennials, partly because of their specific sort of socio-historical context.
What do you mean?
Well, the paper suggests, millennials grew up hearing promises of stability, prosperity, but then faced things like huge student debt, shaky job markets, maybe less wealth than their parents, a sense of institutional trust being lower.
Right. The ground feels less solid, maybe?
Exactly. Plus, navigating the absolute chaos of the internet age, information overload.
Okay, so expectations maybe didn't quite line up with reality for a lot of people.
That's the idea. And the humor in Rick and Morty, the way it often trivializes big stressful things or points out the absurdity of systems, that can be a way to cope.
Like if the world feels chaotic and meaningless anyway, laughing at the absurdity is a release.
Yeah, or at least a way to respond. Instead of just striving endlessly for a meaning that feels out of reach, maybe you respond with irony, with laughter at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. Yeah. That's kind of the absurdist way, right?
That makes a lot of sense, actually. What about Rick himself? He seems like the poster child for cynicism.
Totally. He's often seen as this absurd hero, maybe embodying what some call cheerful nihilism, though that's maybe debatable.
Cheerful nihilism.
Yeah, like acknowledging the meaninglessness but party on anyway. But the core paper points out how the show often tempts you with meaning, with connection, only to pull the rug out from under you.
Classic Rick move.
Right. It echoes that Camus idea, the clash between our hope for clarity and the universe just being irrational. Dan Harmon, the co-creator, basically said the God of the universe is just this cosmic force that doesn't give a franc about you.
Ouch.
Yeah. And the show constantly mocks traditional values. School's a waste of time. Marriage is just a chemical reaction.
Right. Love is just chemicals.
Even when Rick seems to do something big, like his whole quest for that Sichuan sauce,
I've got the sauce.
it ultimately comes back to his own selfish, kind of meaningless obsession. It wasn't really about family or anything grander.
Okay. So why millennials specifically? What's the connection the paper draws?
Well, the core paper talks about them being digital natives, right?
Yeah.
So maybe more tuned into information overload, societal weirdness, online absurdity. Also, maybe a contrast between, for some, a more sheltered upbringing and then hitting the complexities of modern life. That infobesity idea, just too much information, too much contradictory stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And sadly, the paper also notes rising rates of anxiety, depression, things like that among young people and students. Maybe dark, absurdist humor becomes a way to process those difficult feelings, a coping mechanism.
Yeah, I can see that.
So Rick and Morty ends up reflecting these existential jitters. It gives a kind of framework maybe for making sense of postmodern chaos by just embracing the cosmic insignificance and laughing about it.
Finding the joke in the void?
Kind of. And lots of fans online seem to feel that way. Like the show makes real-world absurdity feel a bit more manageable, or at least offers a critique of how messed up things can seem.
It's like, yeah, things are weird and make no sense, but look, here's a show where it's really weird and makes no sense and we can laugh about it. A strange kind of comfort.
Exactly. A strange comfort in shared absurdity.
Okay, so as we kind of wrap up this deep dive then, what are the big takeaways comparing existentialism and absurdism, especially seeing them through this Rick and Morty lens?
Well, the core difference holds, I think. Existentialism. It's on us to create meaning. It's our project. Absurdism. The main event is the clash between our desire for meaning and the universe's silence. The tension is the point.
Make meaning versus acknowledge the meaningless struggle.
Yeah. And Rick and Morty feels like a really potent, really contemporary example of that absurdist outlook. Its whole vibe, its humor, its storylines, they tap directly into that feeling of confronting meaninglessness, but doing it with this dark, comedic, often provocative energy that clearly resonates with a lot of people today.
So it's not really giving answers, is it? It's more like reflecting the questions back at us, but in a really extreme, funny way.
I think that's right. It validates the feeling that things might be absurd, rather than trying to resolve it neatly.
Okay, well, that gives us a lot to think about. And maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. With these kinds of ideas, existentialism, absurdism seeming so present in our culture in shows like Rick and Morty and elsewhere, does knowing about this potential meaninglessness actually free us up? Does it empower us to, make our own values, find our own way? Or does it risk pushing us further apart, leading to more detachment, maybe cynicism, a feeling that nothing really matters, so why bother with collective purpose? What does it all mean for you?
Good question to ponder.
Definitely something to think about until our next deep dive.